initiative. It's an initiative by GDG Jalandhar, where community members deep dive into some technologies. Okay, this initiative has the aim to provide tutoring sessions in technologies like Android, ML, Firebase, Flutter for 7 days. From beginner to advanced level, it covers three stages of training, where uh, where our audience can hone their skills. So these sessions will be in the second and fourth week of every month throughout the year. So if you want to know more about the tech drill, do visit our website techdrill.gdgjalandhar.com. So if you want to know more about our future events or updates regarding tech drill, do join us. Do join our community. This is the URL. And yeah, we are so happy that we have our audience where where they always kept in mind the code of conduct or the guidelines of the community. So we hope that in the future events also our audience will keep the code of conduct or guidelines of our community to have a smooth interaction between between us. So this Mega Month under Tech Drill is an initiative by GDG Jalandhar where it's a 3 week packed events. The second week went on like Tech Jukebox, where we learned about AOG, Chrome extensions, and JavaScript. And in the third week, we had front end, where we talked about Vue, React, and Angular technologies. And today, this is the week fourth, the first session of the week four backend. So where we'll talk about introduction to backend technologies and regarding JavaScript, Node.js, Express.js, and some REST APIs with Firebase, we will know how to build them. So, if you have any doubts regarding the sessions, or if you want to interact with the mentor, do so by joining our Discord server. Here is the link, and the channel name is Mega Month, where you will get to interact with our mentor. And yeah, you will be given like we'll be having some uh, other we can say, if you have some other queries related to anything, so please do ask in the channel. The name is Mega Month. And yeah, without any further delay, I would like to introduce our speaker, Vrijraj Singh. He is the organizer of GDG Jalandhar and also GDE for Firebase and Web Technologies. Vrijraj, you're welcome. The stage is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Trishna. So I'll share my screen. Okay, I hope my screen is visible. Okay, yeah, so my screen is visible, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, awesome. So thank you, Trishna, for the wonderful introductions. Yeah, my name is Vrijraj, and I'm a Google developer expert for web technology at Firebase, as well as I'm a GDG organizer for Jalandhar community. And today I'm going to talk about the backend technologies, like what are the backend technologies, what is the backend developer doing in the corporate world. So let's get started. So here, as you know, like this is my intro part, and yeah. So next one part is like there will be a overview. So in this particular session, I'm going to talk about first fundamental part, like what is the web fundamentals. Like here we have a website, server, and the browser, and then we'll talk about the backend development, like what are the backend development strategies we can follow for writing our business logic, and then we'll talk about the roadmap. Like if you want to start your career in the backend development, and then what are the tracks, like what are the technologies you can start, and then you can build REST APIs or business logic. And then fourth part is we'll talk about the REST APIs and like what are the REST APIs and how REST APIs are working, uh, like from collecting a data from the server and getting a data into the browser part. And then we'll talk about the next step, like in tomorrow we'll talk about like JavaScript, Node.js, and how we can create a REST APIs based on it. So let's get started. So as you know, like we have a three terminologies in the web. If I talk about web development, so first one is website, and the second one is browser, and the third one is server. So website is just like as a collections of web page, and each web page maybe consist of HTML code, or maybe you can consist of image file, audio file, text file, and you can create a web page with the help of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Like with where HTML provide the structure of your web page, and if you want to design your web page, you can go for CSS part. And then if you want to add some interactive element in your web page, or if you want to make more interactive website, then you can go with JavaScript part. And with the help of these three like languages we can consider as HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you can create a website and you can run your website with the help of browser. So browser is just like as a computer program, or we can say software, where we can access our web page. So similarly, like if you have a C++ code, so you need a compiler where you can run your C++ code. So similarly, we have a web browser where we can run or access our web page, and inside web browser, there will be a rendering engine that will render your HTML, CSS, JavaScript code into the GUI part, and then you will be able to see your web page. Okay, and each browser have their specific rendering engine for running your JavaScript code. Like if I talk about the Google Chrome, we have Chrome V8 engine, which is responsible for running your JavaScript code. Similarly, we have Edge Chakra. Chakra is for Edge HTML. Like if you know Microsoft Edge as a browser, so like we have a JavaScript engine name is Chakra. So in the market, we have a lot of JavaScript engine. Like if you go for the Mozilla side, we have a Spider Monkey. So like over the overall idea is browser is just like where you can access or display the web page over the browser, and that will render your HTML, CSS, JavaScript code into the UI element, and then you will be able to see your website. Now, like you have created a website, you can test your website in your system, means the local machine or on your computer. Now, the third step is like you need to create a website that will be accessible from different devices or different locations. So you need a server. Server is just like as a computer where you can upload your HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code, and you can connect that particular computer with the help of network. And we have a IP of that particular computer, and that will work as a server. So server is just like as a computer which is designed to process the request and deliver data to the browser end or maybe the client part. Okay, so we have a server. Server is just like as a normal computer where we can upload our HTML, CSS, JavaScript file, or maybe PDF file or media file, any file. And we have a IP of that particular computer which is connected to the internet, and we can access those files from remote locations in my browser. So server is basically designed to process the request and share the data to the browser part. So in the market, like we have a three types of server. First one is web server, second one is email server, and the third one is FTP server. Okay, so we use web server for serving a web page over the network. For example, like if I talk about like whenever you are visiting a website, let's say gmail.com, twitter.com, linkedin.com, so at the end you are accessing a web page. So there will be a web server, and for running a web server or for accessing a web server, you need a protocol. You need to access that particular protocol, which is named as HTTP, Hypertext Transfer Protocol. With the help of HTTP, you can access the web server. And the second server is email server. So whenever you are sending or receiving a mail over the network, so there will be an email server. And in the inside email server, you have to basically work on two protocols, mainly like SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, and the second one is POP, Post Office Protocol. And the third one is FTP server. We use FTP server for serving a web page. So sorry, serving or maybe moving a file over the network. Like let's say whenever you are downloading or uploading a file over the network, so that will work as a FTP server. And here you have to work on FTP protocol, file transfer protocol. And for the developer point of view, like if I talk about as a web developer, mainly we have to work on the web server part because we have to create a website, or maybe we have to create a backend logic, or maybe we have to create a logic for web applications or scaling part, fundamental part. So as a developer, we have to work on the web server part. And email server is just like as a private things. Like email is very very sensitive, or we can say private informations. So like there are less companies, there are few organizations who are handling the email server. Let's say Google is providing Gmail services, Microsoft is providing Outlook services. So these all are the set of information companies who are handling the email server. And FTP server you can create at your place, and then you can define the FTP server, and then you can store that computer. You can create a computer that will work as a FTP server, like where user can download the file, user can upload that file. You can do that. So this is a overall ideas, like we have a types of server, and then we have a web server, email server, and the FTP server. And most of the developer we have as a developer web, we have to work on the web server part. And if I talk about web server specifically, so web server is just like as a computer program, like is a kind of software where you can install that particular software in your operating system. Let's say like you can install XAMPP or WAMP, where you will get the Apache server. And Apache is just like as a web server that will serve the web page over the browser, or to the request, or the request you are getting from that particular computer. So in the market, you have to basically work on the Nginx part, which is most popular web server. Like if you're working on Node.js or the current technologies, so maybe you have to work on Nginx. Or if you're working on PHP, Perl language, so mainly you have to work on Apache server. And there is third one more server is IIS, Microsoft. Like if you are working on Microsoft technologies, let's say C Sharp or .NET, then you have to work on IIS as a web server. So, like if I talk about corporate industry, so we have in like three servers like Nginx, Apache, and Microsoft IIS, and yeah, it's totally up to you how you can work on it. And then we have another terminology which is name is database. Like whenever we are working on a website, so we have a database. So database just like as a software program, or it's a kind of software where we can store the data, and then we can easily apply for CRUD operations. Like we can create a data, we can read the data, we can update the data, and we can delete the data. So database is just like a these type of system, or maybe we can say the software. And in the market, we have a two type of database, like structured database or unstructured database. So if I talk about structured database, which is basically called as SQL database, and if I talk about unstructured database, which is also called as NoSQL database. So like in structured database, we have a structure, like we can store the data in terms of schema. Like we have a data, like we can store the data in terms of row, column. And structured database is also called as relational database system, like rdbms, relational database system. And inside like structured database, if I talk about in the corporate, so mainly you have to work on the MySQL as a database, where we have a structured data, means the organized data, and we can just putting that data into the database part, and then we can perform some operations related to CRUD. And if I talk about unstructured database, so unstructured database means where we have a unstructured data, where we don't have a schema, maybe machine generated data, or maybe textual data. So you can store that data in NoSQL database. So yeah, in the market we have a lot of NoSQL database like Cassandra, MongoDB, Cloud Firestore. You can use any database. Is totally up to you, the problem statement and the technologies you are working on it. But mostly in the corporate, like you just need a basic knowledge of or understanding of MongoDB as a database. If I talk about unstructured part, so this is a core technologies like database. Inside database, we have a structured and unstructured database. So if you have a knowledge of structured database, you should have an experience with MySQL as a database. And then if you want to explore NoSQL database, then you can go with MongoDB or any other databases. So now then we have a client server architecture. Like whenever you are open your browser means the client. When I say browser, which is equal to browser. Okay, so whenever we are opening our browser and just type, let's say twitter.com, so my request goes to the server part, and server will check whether we have a file or not. If server has that particular file, then server will share or maybe response that particular file to the browser end, and browser having a rendering engine that will render your HTML, CSS, JavaScript code into the UI part, and then you will be able to see your website. So now, as I mentioned, so the request goes to the server, and server will check whether we have a file or not. So server will share a response, and with response we have a like some objects, like we have some data in terms of that particular file. Let's say I'm requesting HTML page of home page. Let's say I'm requesting home.html file. So as an acknowledgement, as a response, I'm getting that particular index.html file, as well as I'm also getting the status code. Status code is just like we use status code for networking purpose, for checking like whether the like at the server end there is we got that particular file, and then we are sending that particular file to the browser, and these all are the status code, like 20x means 200, 201, 202. These all are the status code. Or there is another status code for posting, means adding a data, so we can use 300, 301, these type of uh, yeah. And like there is another status code related to 40x means 401 related to server. And then we have another status code which is related to 50x, like server error. So, like this is a general architecture. Like this is a concept of traditional computing. Like if I want to create my own server, what I do, I'll just go to the store and then I can purchase my computer. And inside computer, I can install web server, and that particular web server will work as a uh, normal server where we can host our website. And then I can connect that particular computer to the web internet, and then user can access that particular website. And this is a approach is called as traditional traditional hosting, where I'm purchasing the computer and then serving a web page over that particular computer. But each computer has a specific limit. For example, I have a computer, and that computer has a limit to serve the data to, let's say, 10 user. So like if 11th user is coming up in my website, so my computer cannot able to process that particular request, because right now the computer can handle only up to 10 user. So what I can do, like I'll purchase another computer, I will put my another computer with my first computer, and then will connect it as a parallel, or maybe we can use serialized concept, and then we are now in my computer that will handle 20 plus users. So this is the approach for traditional computing, but you can go for the cloud concept, like where we are getting more user. It will automatically scale your infrastructure. You don't need to worry about the management part, like how many of computer are working on it, what are the hard drive, what are the RAM. So it will automatically scale your applications or load balancing part. So you can also go for the cloud computing concept, like where you have a large scale user base, and then you can go for it. Okay, so now I'll talk about backend development. So as I mentioned, we have a in the previous week, like if you want to start your career in the web development, then we have a three tracks. Like first one is you can be a front end developer, or you can be a backend developer, or you can be a full stack developer. So basically, front end developer have to work on the client side, means the browser end. Like they have a data, and you have to convert that particular data with the help of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript into the GUI part, graphical user interface part. And basically, those front end developers, they are working on the client side in the browser end. Now, if I talk about the backend development, so here we have to work on the web server part as well as the database part. So like here, web server is just like as a computer, and computer is equal to operating system. So where you have to basically work on the operating system, and as well as the computer part. And inside computer, we can store the data. So you have to work on the database part. So backend developer basically create a REST APIs, which I will talk about later. Like APIs is just like as an interface between the server and the browser. Like we are sending a request to the server, server will check in the database, and then database will share the data to the APIs, and then we are getting that particular data into the browser end with the help of fetch functions or any other functions you can use. Okay, so if you want to start your career in the backend development, so as I mentioned, like backend developer basically have to work on the web server part. Web server is just like as a computer. So on a computer, you can run any programming language. Let's say you can run C++ or you can run C, Rust, Java, Python, PHP. You can use any language in your computer. So similarly, in backend development, you can create a backend applications or business logic with any programming language. But if I talk about the most popular programming language, so you can go for core languages. Let's say you can use JavaScript or you can use Node.js, which is a runtime environment for the JavaScript, which I'll talk about in tomorrow. Like what is the difference between JavaScript and the Node.js part? And you can also create a backend logic with the help of PHP. So if you have a familiar with PHP as a programming language, you can write your custom business logic where you can get the data in PHP and then you can serve the data to the browser end. And then if you are pretty much experienced with Python, then you can use Python language where you can write your custom business logic and you can easily. So these all are the core language most popular, or also you can use the Java as well as we have another language Go, Scala. It's totally up to you. Now we have a frameworks and the libraries which basically extend the functionalities for um, it will help you to making your complex business logic. So if you have experience with if you are working on JavaScript or Node.js part, then you can go for Express where you can easily create REST APIs. Or if you are working on PHP, so we have a framework, let's say Laravel and the code igniter. So the next logo, red one is Laravel logo, where you can create a complex web applications business logic with the help of Laravel as well as the code igniter part. And like if you're working on Python, then you can use the framework, let's say Django and Rust. So there are a lot of companies who are using Django. If I talk about Google is also using Django for the documentations and all. And if you can go to the UK side, London side, so we have a language name is Ruby. So similarly, you can also create a backend logic with the help of Ruby on Rails, which is a framework of Ruby. Where with the help of Ruby on Rails, you can write your custom business logic, or you can create a functions, or you can write the APIs and all. Uh, Okay, and as I mentioned, like as a as a backend developer, we have to work on the web server part and as well as the database part. So if you want to start your career in the backend development, you just need a basic knowledge of at least understanding like the functional knowledge of as a structured database as well as unstructured database. So you should have a knowledge of if I talk about unstructured knowledge database, then you can go for MongoDB, and then if you want to explore structured database, then you can go with MySQL database. So this is a roadmap for the backend developer, and they can follow and they can earn more money in terms of and they can build on large scale business logic. So and if I talk about like if I will get a job as a backend developer, so what type of work I have to do in the backend development? So backend developer basically create a website. Basically, that website will work as a server side render. Like you have a website and you will host or serve that particular website on the server end, and you will get the static data or static HTML page in the browser end, and these website is also called as SSR, server side render website. And these websites are very fast in terms of performance and the SEO part because you have a HTML meta tags. And as a backend developer, you have to work on the REST APIs. You have to create APIs. You have to write a logic like for collecting the data into the database part, and then you can write those business logic. And as a backend developer, you have to work on the database part because like this is the main work as a backend developer, as well as you have to work on the security and database backup part, like where you can write some scheduler functions or you can write some script where you can collect a backup and you can write some security logic. And also backend developer has a little bit knowledge of cloud. cloud computing integrations tools, let's say CI/CD part, like where you can easily deploy your web applications or the business logic. And and again, yeah, backend developer have to work on the web server part, which is a computer. Computer is having the operating system, so you should have a like good level of knowledge of operating system. Maybe you can go with Linux operating system if you are pretty much familiar with Linux, and or you can go with Microsoft operating system. These are the two top most popular operating system for the backend, and there are a lot of things. So now, like as I mentioned, like we have a client server architecture. We as a browser sending a request to the web server. Server will check if there is any file. So if there is any file, server will send a response with help of data and the status code. So like we can send a request, like if you are sending a request from browser to the server, so we can send a two type of requests. We can send a file request like, hey, I'm looking for an index.html page in that particular server, or maybe hey, I'm looking for an app.css file, or hey, I'm looking for a resume.pdf file in your computer. So server will check this request is file request, and server will check inside the file directory, and then if we have a file, server will share the response with that particular file. Or we can have another request which is called as HTTP request, where we can request to this that particular server like, hey, I'm looking for a uh, I'm looking for a data those who have registered for backend development bootcamp. So inside server we have a database, and that request goes to the database, and database will collect the data, write a query where we can perform a queries for collecting all the user data who has registered for backend development bootcamp, and then we got the data in the backend part through the APIs. So here, in if I talk about HTTP requests, so we have a get request, post request, put request, and to put request, where we can perform these type of requests on the database at the server end. And basically we use get request for get the data from the database part. We use post request whenever we want to add the data into the server or add the data into the database part. You can use post request. We use delete request like whenever we have some queries, whenever we want to delete some data into the database part, then we can use delete request. And we can use put request whenever we want to update the data into the database, then you can use put request. So these all are the HTTP requests where with the help of these requests you can perform CRUD operations on the database part inside server. So I'll talk about REST APIs. So basically, APIs is just like as an interface. Basically, this is just like as a programming logic. Like we can consider as a functions. Like I'm calling the functions. That function's name is get data or get all data from database. So APIs is just like as a programming interface where that particular functions is stored into the server end, and I'm calling that I'm executing that particular functions through the URL in the server, and we are getting that particular data with the help of APIs. So in the market we have to work on the REST APIs. REST is a concept. If I talk about the full form, so we have a representational state transfer, which is a full form of REST. And with the help of REST you can share request the APIs to the browser or to the server. So like this is a format, like whenever we use get request, we use get request for get the data from the database. So this is a kind of request. Let's say I'm typing the URL https colon slash, this is a host URL. Let's say api.github.com, and then the path is UR users. So I'm requesting with this particular APIs that I need the details of GitHub user. Okay, so I'll give you the example. I will share my screen. api.github.com/user. So when I call this particular API, so I'll get a data into the browser end. Like basically, there will be some functions at server end, and that will execute, and that will run a queries on the database part. Like, hey, I'm looking for GitHub user informations, and that will serve me as in the browser end that this is the data in the JSON format. Okay, so this is a format. Now, let's say I'm calling this APIs once again. Let's say get HTTPS colon API slash github.com slash user. This will give me the GitHub user informations. So now, what actually is doing in behind the picture? So whenever we are calling this APIs on the browser end, or maybe API testing tools, let's say Postman or Swagger, if you have a knowledge, so this request goes to the server. Okay. So in server is basically a computer with web server as a software program, and then we have a database in that particular server. So this request goes to the server, and server having a computer with web server and the database part. And as I mentioned, like in the server, you can use any language for writing a custom business logic. For example, you can use Java, C++, Python, Rust, Go, Ruby, any language. So let's say I have created a file inside server, which is name is index.js file, which is a JavaScript file. Here I have written some logic. So let's say I have written some logic. My name is, let's say, app.get. Whenever we are getting a request, let's say slash user, this function will execute, and this will give share the response with GitHub user JSON data. And whenever we are calling the APIs, then this request goes to the server. Inside server, we have an index.js file. This will execute, and this will call that particular functions, and then we will get a response with GitHub user as a JSON data. Okay. So now, as I mentioned, like in the corporate, like we can perform four CRUD operations with the help of REST APIs. So first is get request. With get request we use for getting a data from the database part. We use post request for, let's say, add some data into the database part. And then if you want to update some data into the database, then you have to use put request. And if you want to delete some data into the database, then you have to work on delete requests. So I'll give you the example. Let's say I have created an API like xyz.com slash user. So this API request goes to like this request will be like get, because this is a request HTTP request type, and then there will be a some like host URL, let's say api.bridgerod.xyz slash API slash user. So I'm calling this API, and whenever I just call the API, I got a response in the browser, and like we have a list of data in the database part. Okay, so we can call APIs like, hey, right now we have created API get user, but if I want to like get a single user data, let's say I need a user data whose ID is, let's say, 123 or maybe 45. So you can send a request. So I'm sending a request. My request is get, because I need to read the data into the database end, and then there will be a host URL, and then my path is API slash user, and then we can pass the ID. Let's say I need a data of user whose ID is 1. So here I'm getting a response. Okay. So this is a format. Like if I use get user APIs, so here we are getting a all user data. But if I'm passing the ID, then we are getting a single user data. Okay. So we can also use like put method, where put request, where we can update the data. So let's say I want to update the user whose ID is 1, and I wanted to update the name. So what I'll do, I'll just type put, and then my request is API slash user slash 1, means I wanted to update entry of user which ID is 1, and here we have updated data. So this is a request which is goes to the server end, and server, what I'll do, server will update the data, and that's it. And we got the updated data. So earlier we have a bridge Raj, and then we are updating that particular data with Vrijraj Singh. Okay, and then we have another request which is called as delete request. We use delete request for deleting a data into the database part. So let's say I'm requesting, like I wanted to delete user data whose ID is 1. So my request is delete request. The path is API slash user slash 1. 1 means I wanted to delete the user whose ID is 1. And then this request goes to the server, and server will delete, and then we are getting the blank as a JavaScript object. Okay. So also you can create a data into the database. Let's say I wanted to add some new row in the database. So I wanted to create a user. So we can pass we can call post request, and we can call the APIs. Let's say API slash user, and then we can pass the data. Let's say I'm passing the data, like I wanted to add Vrijraj as a new entry as a user. So when we are sending this request, then we got a response. Like say, because if you are using MySQL database, it will automatically like assign a new ID as a primary key. So there will be a new primary key, and then we have a field. Okay, so these all are the APIs. Like we can use get APIs when we are calling get API slash user. So it will give me all user details. When I use get request with API slash user with ID, so I will get the details of the user whose ID is one. And we can use put requests like if you want to update data. So you can use API slash user slash one where I wanted to update the data whose ID is one, and then you can also pass the updated data. And then we have another request which is name is delete request. Like if you we have a data, and then if you want to delete some row whose ID is let's say one, so you can use API slash user slash one. So this is just like as a standard format, like where with the help of these format you can create APIs. And then we have another request, like you can use post request for adding a data into the database. Then you can call API slash user. Okay, and now I'll talk about like this is an overview like how APIs is working, and like how we can call the APIs and all. So suppose you as a backend developer we have created a APIs. Now we need to test that particular APIs. So in the market we have a lot of tools that you can use for testing purpose. So like the most popular tools is Postman and the Swagger. You can use Postman where you can easily create a documentations. You can test your APIs, and you can do many more things which I'll tell you that particular things in upcoming days. And similarly you can use Swagger. Swagger is also same thing for testing your APIs for documentations purpose. So you can use any tools, it's totally up to you. Okay, so now what next? Like tomorrow I'll talk about the JavaScript part, like why we can use like how we can use the JavaScript in the backend technologies, like what is JavaScript and what actually Node.js is doing. And then we'll talk about the Node.js part, like where we can create a server, simple server, which will serve your HTML code or maybe JavaScript file or maybe CSS file or maybe a PDF file. We will create a simple server with the help of Node.js. And in day three, we'll talk about we will create a REST APIs with the help of Express.js, and in the day four, we will create a REST APIs. Basically, we will connect that particular REST APIs with Cloud Firestore as a database, and then we will post, we will deploy those APIs on Firebase or maybe Heroku, shortly up to you. So yeah, I'm open for the questions. So yeah, so today is for the introductions. So like tomorrow, I'll go for with hands-on sessions where we'll talk about JavaScript, Node.js, and how we can start our career for creating a simple Node.js and many more things. So yeah, I'm open for the questions. So if you have any questions, you can ask your questions.
Hi sir.
Yeah,
Sir, may I ask question in हिंदी?
yeah, sure.
सर जैसे अगर आपने बताया था कि अगर आपने लिखा था पुट एपीआई यूज़र फिर स्लैश करके वन लिखा तो आपने फिर उसने जो मतलब वो अपडेट करा उसने फिर वो फर्स्ट यूज़र का करा.
One means like I wanted to update the data whose ID is user ID is one, means the primary key where we have a database. Inside database, let's say we have a table and then we have a list of data. So I wanted to update that particular rows whose ID is one. Okay.
यस सर. सर अगर ऐसे ही डिलीट में अगर हम वन नहीं लिखते हैं तो क्या वो पूरा डेटाबेस डिलीट कर देगा मतलब उसमें
Nahin,
जो डाटा.
no, no, no. You have to write that particular logic. This is a standard in the corporate.
ओके सर, थैंक यू.
Yeah. Okay, Firebase is not a database. Firebase is a like backend service. Like Firebase is providing a backend as a service where you can use Firebase as a database. You can also use Firebase as a backend service. It's like Firebase is providing authentication service where you can authenticate your user, and similarly Firebase is providing test lab for the mobile devices. So there are Firebase is providing a lot of services. With the help of Firebase, you can build your uh, like complex applications. You just need to focus on the front end part, and Firebase is providing a backend services. You just need to use that particular services, and then you can create a complex applications. So that's all from my end. Thank you, and I'm open for the questions. Yeah, and questions you can ask your questions.